First of all, thank you very much for spending this beautiful Southern California day with us inside this room. I would also like to acknowledge somebody who came in late, LB Castillo, the widow of our beloved Kasama, Greg Santillan. I'm Rene Ciria Cruz. I used to go by Rene Cruz in an attempt to hide my real name from the Marcos dictatorship, which was not pulled at all. But I think it would be a useful reminder to recount that KDP emerged when the world was a different place and the United States was a different place. The Second World War and victory over international fascism opened up political opportunities, unprecedented political opportunities for anti-colonial struggles of various peoples all over the world. The Allied victory opened up floodgates to a powerful torrent of national liberation struggles globally. So you had the Vietnamese revolution, you had the Laotian and Cambodian liberation movements, you had the Korean War, the Cuban Revolution, guerrilla struggles all over Latin America and Africa. In Africa, the armed struggle against French and Portuguese colonialism. And in the Philippines was no different. I'm supposed to talk about the Philippine situation, essentially. I would start with this. So we had the failed communist-led Hook Rebellion in the 1950s. And that was soon followed by a resurgence of nationalism and anti-imperialism, especially among the youth and students in the Philippines. So for more than 3 decades, what we would call the international revolutionary process was in a rapid flow. It was a time of fast-moving events, fast-moving political opportunities for people who are working for social change, and for baby boomers like us, being politicized both in the United States and in the Philippines. We had a point of view that we felt that the world could be changed within our lifetimes. Mm-hmm. So that we invested our lives in joining this movement and organizing the Filipino community and organizing the KDP. Hence, at that time, the African American community had the Black Panthers. The Puerto Rican community had the Young Lords, the Puerto Rican Socialist Party. The Hispanic American community had the Brown Berets, and the Filipino community had the KDP. We had no guns, we had no uniforms, but we had the same radical politics all out. Because America was a different place. By the late 60s, in the Philippines, the Philippine economy had the attempt of the post-war rebuilding of the Philippine economy had failed, sadly failed. So the economy was stagnant. The young generation of people born after the war had no place to go, no future to look forward to. The country was saddled by not only economic stagnancy, but also political corruption by the oligarchical elite. So that it was no miracle, or it's no great mystery why the international revolutionary fervor caught fire in the Philippines too. So that by the late 60s, you had massive demonstrations and protests, student and youth protests, labor strikes also, and the emergence of a new movement led by a new communist party, which became the National Democratic Front, its many organizations, and the New People's Army. So by the time the KDP was organized in 1973 and the Marcos dictatorship was imposed in 1972, millions of young Filipinos had been influenced by revolutionary left-wing politics, both in the Philippines and here. It's good to kind of like, it's kind of amazing because in the United States, the Filipino community was only about 350,000 people. Most of them were on the West Coast. And the new immigrant wave, new immigration started just 7 years ago. It was 1965. So by the time the organization was barely 8 years. So it's kind of like a striking phenomenon that the Times could produce such an organization. And it's because of the Times. You know, it's time to rise. You know? So this explains the dual program of the KDP. The dual program, which would be the orientation for its activists to organize in the Filipino community, and the dual program that eventually lead to our alienation from the leadership of the Philippine movement. Okay, I will explain that later. But before that, KDP led 14 years of unceasing work against the US-supported Marcos dictatorship. And these were 14 hard years working with individuals in coalition against the Marcos dictatorship, members of the former National Committee for the Restoration of Civil Liberties in the Philippines, the Friends of the Filipino People, and later on with bourgeois groups like the Movement for a Free Philippines and the Ninoy Aquino movement, all oppositionist groups to Marcos. So the years leading to the downfall of Marcos in 1986 saw activities like the adoption of political prisoners, the petition campaigns against US aid to Marcos. We established a Congress task force to cultivate allies in Congress and make use of hearings. We sent secret and open investigative teams to the Philippines. We gathered aid for the New People's Army with countless demonstrations with a simultaneous takeover of Philippine consulates when key leaders of the Philippine movement were threatened with being brought before a firing squad. We defeated an extradition treaty that was proposed by Marcos. And it was a lot of our effort and the movement's effort to do that. So it was a very busy 14 years just on the anti-Marcos struggle alone. With the successful activities, however, came new demands from the leadership of the Philippine left, which believed that the KDP's work on domestic US issues, like against discrimination, was taking the focus away from Philippine support work. What are these? What is it? These are coalition building within the Filipino community on issues such as international hotel eviction, textbook reform. Our associate was involved in textbook reform. We had national campaigns and doctors preventing the deportation of Filipino doctors, preventing the deportation of Filipino nurses. All successful campaigns, by the way. We exposed the discrimination, the exploitation of 4-H club members from the Philippines by farmers in the United States. And Bo is here to recall that experience. We struggled for reforms within the Canada Workers Union in Seattle. We had local police brutality campaigns, the anti-Bakri reverses. So arguably, it looked like we did took up a lot of work, a day at a time, from Philippine support work. But we argue that they were not mutually exclusive. That when you do Philippine support work, you broaden the opportunities for developing activists, for one. And when you do US-based community work, you deepen the roots of that anti-Marcos, anti-imperialist consciousness that you develop. But we weren't successful in arguing this. The differences widened, especially when the KDP refused to abide by the Philippine left's boycott of the snap presidential election that led to the ouster of Marcos. We felt, we had boycotted previous elections with the Philippine left, but we felt that that period was very different, that it was a revolutionary crisis for the regime, at a time that the state power could change hands. And by boycotting the broad opposition to the regime, you're walking out of an opportunity to be part of the victory against the dictatorship. And we proved correct. And that was the kind of the nail that, or whatever, the axe that severed, completely severed, so that the Philippine left started refusing our support, and also refusing to give us resources such as propaganda materials from the Philippines, such as contacts, such as exposure tours of allies to the Philippines to develop them further. So by 1986, we figured that it was a hopeless case, and we voted to dissolve the KDP. But a core network remained active informally to keep publishing and distributing the Katipunan newspaper of the KDP. The aim being to help activists in the Philippines to develop critical capacities. Because after the boycott, a lot of members of the left began questioning, raising strategic and tactical questions of the leadership. And continuing the newspaper was an attempt to help those activists, both from our input and as a venue for their views, until 1991, when the Soviet Union and the socialism as it existed dissolved. And so the existing paradigm for socialism dissolved. And when you don't have the power of orientation that guides you in your day-to-day work, it could be very disconcerting and very destabilizing, which happened to all of us. Because Marxism is very good as a prescriptive method of figuring out what's wrong with society, what is the fundamental, is fatal problems. But the future, the outline, the socialist program of socialism was barely an outline. And the first attempt to implement it failed. And so at that time, all of KDP disappeared. We all kind of folded up our tents and went home. So that was what happened. Now, meanwhile, the downfall of Marcos, and here we go into the Philippine situation, restored political spaces that are important for the continuation of movements and struggle for social change in the Philippines. New political formations and even the front organizations of the underground Philippine left now had open space for open existence, open operations. Free press and free speech were established. A party list system allowed political parties from the left and from progressive forces to be in Congress and legislate reforms, or use that as a venue, to amplify progressive views. But now, but this happened without not without the efforts of right-wing forces to turn back the clock. So the liberal democracy that was restored or established after Marcos had survived several military coup attempts from the right. And he had survived the corrupt Estrada and Macapagal administrations. It had survived the bungling Aquino administration. But people are not sure it's going to survive the current administration of Duterte. Duterte does not have any democratic impulses. All his impulses are shortcuts and authoritarian. He has a phalanx of similar-minded people in the government and the support of about 16 million voters. So there is no denying that he has popular support. The appeal of authoritarianism in the Philippines is very strong. We could talk about that a little bit more in the question and answer why that is. So that it seems like the combination of the Trump administration and the Duterte administration points to the possibility that it's probably time to rise again. And that's my end.
Yes, because of the inspiration of the National Democratic Front and CDP, the NPA. That's clearly that we wanted to study Marxism and use it in analyzing American reality and the Filipino community. In fact, we did have a number of tools to do that. So every year we gathered our national leaderships and chapter leaderships and had a leadership conference, which was the sharing of best practices, like the corporate best practices seminars. And out of that, we would summarize these lessons and put them in the Ang Activista, which was the internal theoretical bulletin of the KDP. Every 2 years, in conjunction with our National Congress, instead of national leadership conferences, we had a theoretical school, which is studying some basic Marxist texts, not directly related to our work. And the goal of that was very clear. We were very careful not to fall into the trap of many US left formations where Marxist texts become a Bible. The point is to memorize and like that. What guided us, as Bruce would say, is that what we wanted to do was to learn how Marx analyzed things, how he approached his interpretation of reality to be able to change reality. So it was a very useful way of studying Marxism. And then we could apply it in our analysis of certain problems that come up. Who's responsible for the threatened deportation of Filipino nurses and why? And that you could use that analysis to systematically break that down and figure out who's responsible, who should be targeted, and what's the goal. So stuff like that. For all of you who are interested in organizing, I think one key thing that we did was our approach to community organizing was not only what we call social investigation, but once you start work, we don't do it by ourselves. It's not the KDP, it's not just the KDP doing all the campaigning. It had to be a coalition of community people, not KDP. Because that's the only way success can be achieved. That's the only way progressivism can be developed. So our advice, don't do it by yourselves. Just make sure you're in coalition. And as a footnote to that, we were an integral part of the Philippine Revolution. We sent, in the book you will see as an article, a woman comrade we sent back to the Philippines in the hope of facilitating the discussion about our differences with the leaders of the Philippine left. So she goes there, and instead of entertaining her request for a discussion, they sent her off to the New People's Army. She was given a gun, and she had to integrate, and she integrated very well. The rest of the story you have to read. Okay. The other thing about the Domingo Viernes case, building the community support around it, we knew how to do. But this was a case that was being fought in court, which we didn't know how to do. And you had to rely on the lawyers. Now, the question of how do you shepherd a legal case led by lawyers, but not let the lawyers lead the politics of it? That was a big question. And what was useful, the question about Marxism, and what was useful was our familiarity with the word, the state and revolution. That showed us the limits of how far you can go to get social justice from a capitalist judiciary. And this is what helped us make politics guide the lawyers, aside from the fact that the lawyers were leftists themselves. First of all, as I said in my presentation, that the whole global revolutionary process is in an ebb. It's not the fast, rapid developments the former revolutions are in the process of consolidating their victories, consolidating new societies, and basically the armed struggle has ceased, and for a while. We don't know when it's going to flow again. So that's one influence that's different from then and now. And even in the US, that is reflected. The left of liberal politics is as an ebb. So that also influences, therefore, how politics develops in the Filipino community. And the absence of, let's say, an organized force that's consciously trying to change the community doesn't help. Right now, we do have leftist formations that are linked to the Philippine revolutionary movement, but I think they are unfortunately being mistrained. They are not very well connected to the community. They exist mainly as demonstrators, and unfortunately, there's a lot of shortcomings in the training of those young people. Young people attracted to the romance of revolution and armed struggle, and basically that's it. So hopefully that would change, but I don't think it would change without a change of orientation of the Philippine leadership. The Philippine leadership is basically still wedded to a principally military struggle for state power, at the cost of developing a more politically vibrant and politically led struggle. Okay, Bruce was no longer with us then. He doesn't know. He doesn't know the tortures we endured. Well, pretty much, as I said, we looked around and said, how are we going to continue supporting the Philippine liberation movement that doesn't want our support? And there were no other groups that were viable in the Philippines. So, and at that point, frankly, we were demoralized. You know, most of us were demoralized because that relationship had been long-standing and for the most part useful and fruitful. So that was a very big, you know, that's how we had a Congress, last Congress, and we decided that, yeah, it's time to fold up. Aside from the fact that we had gotten older, and people you could tell that the ebb was coming on because people wanted to rebuild their lives, return to their careers, or start lives, families, fall in love, you know, stuff like that. And it was that time. It was that time. Then later on, as I said, there was another, but a core group remained to put out the newspaper. But the big blow was the collapse of socialism as we knew it. Because for us, when you organize day to day for reform, change the politics of the community, and you lose the strategic vision of why you're doing it, what this all adds up to, it was very, very destabilizing. And I think we're still destabilized up to now because we don't have a working example of the socialism that we wanted. The best one is Scandinavian socialism. You know? Who else? You tolerate capitalism and tax it to the hilt and redistribute, better. But that's as far as we can go now, right now. If I remember right, it was about, in the 250 million yearly mark, in terms of financial aid. Then you had aid in terms of debts or loans from the World Bank and the IMF, that's in the billions. And then you had military aid in kind, so it was substantial. And the main reason it turns out that Marcos was being supported by the United States is not principally the economic aspect of imperialism, but really the military aspect of imperialism. It was at the time of the Vietnam War. The Philippines was being used as a staging area. 3 huge bases. One naval, and 2 more, Clark and Mactan Air Base, were being used to bomb Vietnam. So it was a lot of real estate and a lot of equipment and a lot of access to the region that was at stake. And Marcos held the United States, it's kind of like a quid pro quo. I protect your bases, you protect me.